The echoes of her name still linger in the air, a reminder of the overwhelming passion and connection that took place. Last night, she took me to places I didn't know existed, and I can't stop thinking about how every inch of my soul screamed for her. Her touch was electric, and every whisper of her name sent shivers down my spine. I didn't expect it to happen, but in that moment, I was hers, lost in the intensity of the experience, unable to control the way my heart raced and my body reacted. Last night, everything changed as I screamed her name. It was more than just a physical release. It was the culmination of everything we'd built, the connection we shared. Now, I can't escape the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that keeps circling my mind. There was something about her presence that had me undone in the most exhilarating way. When her name left my lips last night, it felt like a declaration, a surrender, an acknowledgement that I was lost in the intensity of it all. In the heat of the moment, her name was all I could say. It wasn't just a word, it was a testament to the passion we shared. And now, as I try to process the aftermath, I find myself replaying the events in my head, consumed by the feelings she evoked in me. Last night felt like a dream, but it was so much more than that. When I screamed her name, it wasn't out of control. It was the release of every pent-up desire, every unspoken thought that had been building up for so long. I'm still reeling from it, still feeling the way her touch ignited something deep within me. Screaming her name last night wasn't just an expression of desire. It was a connection that goes beyond the physical, a moment that stays with me now, burning in my mind. She made me forget everything, every thought, every doubt. The only thing that mattered was her, the way she made me feel. Screaming her name last night was the culmination of everything I had been holding back. Last night was a whirlwind of emotions, passion, and connection. Her name came out of my mouth in a way I couldn't control, but it was exactly what I needed to express the intensity of everything we were feeling in that moment. When her name left my lips, it felt like a confession, like I was telling the universe just how deeply I felt in that moment. It wasn't just physical, it was a profound, emotional experience that I can't seem to shake off. I can still feel the heat of her body next to mine, the way every touch sent waves of pleasure through me. Screaming her name was my way of saying everything I couldn't put into words, of letting her know how deeply she moved me. The way she made me feel last night is something I can't put into words, but screaming her name seemed to be the only way to capture the intensity of the moment. It was a release, a declaration of the way she had me completely under her spell. In that moment, nothing else mattered. It was just her and me, caught in a whirlwind of passion and raw emotion. When I screamed her name, it was as if the world paused, and I was consumed by the feelings she evoked in me. There's something about her that makes everything else fade away. Last night, as I screamed her name, I was lost in the feeling of being completely overwhelmed by her presence, unable to focus on anything but the connection we shared. She ignited something in me that I didn't even know existed. Screaming her name wasn't just a physical reaction, it was the release of everything that had been building up inside me, the surrender to the overwhelming emotions I couldn't contain. Every part of me was on fire last night, and when her name escaped my lips, it was a reflection of just how much she consumed my thoughts, my desires, my very being. I can't stop thinking about her and what we shared. In that moment, I wasn't just a person. I was a feeling, a reaction to the way she made me feel. Screaming her name was a reflection of everything she made me experience, everything she stirred inside me. What happened last night was more than just a physical encounter. It was a moment of connection that left me breathless. Screaming her name was my way of telling her, in the most primal way, how much she had me. She didn't just take me to the edge, she made me fall into a sea of emotions I didn't know I could experience. Last night, when I screamed her name, it wasn't just an exclamation. It was a testament to the profound effect she had on me. As the night fades and the memories remain, I can't stop thinking about the way her touch made me react. Screaming her name was more than a release. It was the acknowledgement of how deeply she had me in that moment. I've never experienced anything like this before. Last night, her name was the only thing I could think about, the only word that seemed to capture the depth of my feelings. And now I'm left with a mind full of thoughts I can't shake. Last night was a whirlwind, a moment of passion and connection that I can't stop replaying in my mind. When I screamed her name, it was like I was pouring every emotion into one word, everything I was feeling in that moment. Her touch had me undone in ways I didn't think were possible. Screaming her name last night was the culmination of everything we shared, the intensity, the passion, the connection. Now I'm left with a storm of emotions I can't quite control. The memory of last night lingers in my mind, and every time I close my eyes, I'm reminded of how deeply she affected me. Screaming her name was more than just a release. It was the culmination of everything that had been building between us. She made me feel things I didn't think were possible. Screaming her name wasn't just an outburst. It was the release of emotions I didn't know I had, a moment of pure connection that I can't get out of my head. I've never felt more alive than I did last night, and her name was the only thing I could scream in that moment. It was a release of every emotion, every thought, every feeling I had been holding on to. Last night was the kind of night that stays with you long after the moment is over. Screaming her name wasn't just a reaction, it was the way I expressed the intensity of everything we shared. She had me at every touch, every word. When I screamed her name, it wasn't just a physical reaction, it was my soul, my heart, my entire being acknowledging the connection we shared in that moment. I can't stop thinking about her, about the way she made me feel. Last night, when I screamed her name, it wasn't just an exclamation, it was the culmination of everything that had been building inside me. The intensity of last night still lingers, and every time I think about it, I feel the emotions rise again. Screaming her name was my way of expressing everything I couldn't say, of giving in to the feelings she had awakened in me. Last night was a moment I will never forget, a night filled with passion and connection. When I screamed her name, it was more than just a sound. It was the reflection of everything I felt in that moment. I'm still trying to process what happened last night. Screaming her name wasn't just about pleasure, it was a reflection of everything we shared, everything we felt, everything that made that moment unforgettable. She made me lose myself in the most exhilarating way. Screaming her name last night was a moment of pure surrender, of giving in to the overwhelming emotions that she stirred in me. Last night, I was completely undone by her. Screaming her name wasn't just a reaction. It was my soul's way of acknowledging the intense feelings she evoked in me. Every time I think about her, I feel a rush of emotions. Last night, when I screamed her name, it was more than just a release. It was a moment of connection, of passion, of something that goes beyond words. Her touch had me on fire, and when I screamed her name, I knew I was hers in that moment. The intensity of it all still burns within me, leaving me with a whirlwind of thoughts I can't escape. I never imagined a moment like this, but when it happened, I couldn't deny the way it felt. Screaming her name wasn't just about passion, it was a release of everything that had been building up inside me. Last night, something shifted. Screaming her name wasn't just about the physical, it was a declaration, a confession of everything I had been feeling, everything she had stirred within me. When she touched me, everything else faded away. Last night, As I screamed her name, I felt like I was completely consumed by her, unable to focus on anything else but the connection we shared. Screaming her name last night was the most primal, emotional thing I've ever done. It wasn't just about physical pleasure. It was a reflection of how deeply she had me, of everything I felt in that moment. There are no words to describe what happened last night, but when I screamed her name, it felt like the only way to capture everything I was feeling. It was raw, unfiltered, and utterly unforgettable. She made me forget about the world. When I screamed her name, it wasn't just an exclamation. It was a release of all the emotions, all the desires, everything I was feeling at that moment. Last night was an experience that left me breathless. Screaming her name was more than just a reaction. It was the release of everything that had been building up inside me, everything she had awakened in me. I can't stop replaying last night in my mind. Screaming her name wasn't just about pleasure. It was the culmination of everything we shared, everything we felt, everything that made that moment unforgettable. Last night, she made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. Screaming her name was my way of acknowledging everything she stirred within me, a way of expressing the overwhelming emotions I couldn't contain.